This week on the Digital Marketing Scoop, we're talking with Josh Braaten about measuring brand. Josh, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Thank you. So if you would, for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you and your company do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Josh Braaten. I am the founder and leader of Brandish Insights, and we are a brand measurement and growth agency. So we help brands try to uncover the actual metrics and key performance indicators around their brands, and then help them develop growth strategies around those numbers to help support their overall company growth objectives.
Cool. So I suppose a lot of what we would do here we would do a lot in the Google Ads space. So it's very easy for us in terms of tracking, in terms of return on investment and return on ad spend. But in the measuring, we'll say measuring brand can be, how do you go about measuring the results of, we'll say, a brand building campaign? Or how do you kind of measure awareness, I suppose?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, I come from a very similar space in marketing as what you all are talking about. So I have a performance marketing background. I got into internet marketing, as we call it, back in 2010 or around then. Before that, I was doing project management for websites and business consulting, and really just fell in love with technology, and also how you could measure marketing. And so got Google Analytics certified, was really big into SEO and PPC and all of that. And then as we started to get more sophisticated in our measurement, we started to run media mix kind of analyses where you would take not just the directly tracked and attributable channels like things that have UTM parameters on them, like your ads and other things like that, but also would be looking for things that aren't necessarily as trackable. So what time your, like for example, when your TV commercials run, they don't have UTM parameters on them, but they are driving traffic to the website. When people talk about you on social media, when there's a really great blog post that is on your company's website that goes, that saturates the community and kind of makes its rounds. Those things all actually drive brand. And what we found from our media mix model was that our blog and our non-branded search terms were actually the biggest drivers of brand. And not only that, but about 60 to 80% of all of our revenue was coming from brand. And so that really got me down this path of, well, if we could tie what we're doing in performance marketing to what we're doing on the brand side, then we really have something special, because usually we've got the brand marketers on one side of the party and we've got the performance marketers on the other side of the party. And it's like it's a seventh grade dance where nobody's kind of like, dancing with each other. Right. So yeah, that's, I think, the approach or the philosophy or the background that we kind of come from. And then as it relates directly to how to measure, brand, or how to measure awareness specifically, that's where there's not a lot of consensus. There's a couple different meaningful ways that I think people are getting some value from. So I'd say first is just going to some sort of like website ranking service like Alexa, right, to see kind of how you rank versus your competitor. That's a really oftentimes baseline metric, very, very rudimentary. The next thing you might see is maybe social media mentions, and that's very popular, and a lot of people are doing that as well. There's some good value in tracking that type of engagement, but it's not necessarily a direct proxy for awareness. Then you start to get into some of the more data-driven approaches. And I think one that I'm seeing right now that's really popular in the performance marketing space is tracking branded traffic, either within your Google AdWords account or within your Google Search Console. And so, AdWords for paid, Search Console for organic, looking to see what are the actual numbers of impressions around those branded terms, those search terms that contain your brand name, and then how are they growing over time for you and your competitors. But then the last way, and this is the way that you actually see larger household brands tracking awareness is we're actually running surveys. And so we're running surveys with consumer panels, and we're asking, for consumers, we're trying to find a good match for that consumer market or the geographies or the types of people that we're looking for. And then on a B2B side, you're often looking for specific roles, purchasing teams, that type of thing. What percentage of those populations actually recognize and are aware of the brand? That's probably the most rigorous way to measure awareness that we know of today.
Cool. One thing I definitely have noticed is you mentioned that traditional performance marketing and their SEO is that how, I won't say easy, but how much easier it is to rank content on sites that have a strong brand versus sites that don't. So forget all the other metrics like incoming links and everything else. But when a website has a very strong brand behind it, it's so much easier to rank that content, that new content that they have, quite quickly versus a more, let's say, traditional SEO route where people are very focused on the content, the incoming links, the more I won't say old fashioned, but the way, obviously links are important, but the older way of doing SEO. I think brand has become all encompassing now. You mentioned the difference between the performance marketers and the brand marketers. It really has come to a stage where that has to come together now for a successful brand business.
I couldn't agree more. And honestly, I grew up in the from the organic SEO ranks, and I think a lot of these things that search marketers describe specifically as, well, this is about authority, or this is about trust, or this is about credibility, or this is about semantically what your domain is about, thematically. Those are actually all brand, right? Because
reputation.
A brand is you want to become synonymous with whatever category you serve, and you want to become the most authoritative and credible name within that space, right? So I think if you're really thinking, not just what do I need to be doing today from a search perspective to win, but also what does it take to build a brand and how does search support that? I think that's where you can build something that's really untouchable from like a rankings perspective, like what's going to change in the algorithms, today or tomorrow type thing.
And even just from a visual point of view, if you're on that first page of results and you're in there as a strong brand versus someone who might have the most amazing content, but they're an unknown brand, chances are your click-through rate's going to actually be higher because you have that more familiarness, that more awareness and that trust already built up.
Yeah, brand feeds in hugely. I mean, like if you're not in position one, but you have a stronger brand than whoever is in position one, maybe you're actually getting more of the click-through rate,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's all sorts of great stats too that talk about, the vast majority of purchases occur from brands that are amongst somebody's initial consideration set. And so if you're not top of mind when you're actually thinking of a purchase, if you're not even, or if the consumer's not even aware of you, then they obviously can't make a purchase.
Yeah.
In terms of some of the metrics you mentioned, obviously on social we look at things like followers and likes. Are they really a good indicator, do you feel, of brand awareness and familiarity, or are you very much more focused on, you mentioned the surveys and those type of things? I suppose the more can you get a more honest opinion from those? Because especially when you look at social, you can have a lot of bots, you can have a lot of let's say not 100% true representation of what a company is on social media. So basically, I suppose in terms of how strong a brand is, do you find those metrics that social media provide quite useful?
I think it always comes down to, first, what is a business or a brand trying to accomplish, right? And then from there, agreeing on how we're going to measure that progress. I think that there are a lot of metrics in social media that are very, very valuable that either are used out of context or they're maybe used just shy of what they need to really be to be useful. So, for example, I work with some folks who are measuring their employer brand, and an important metric for them might be the social media engagement rate. And that might be looking at their LinkedIn profile and looking at all of the posts within the last 2 months, and then looking at the average engagements on each of those, the comments, the shares, the, the likes, whatever it might be, and then taking that as a metric, right? As a rate, as a, 30% or a 50% engagement rate, and then comparing that with other brands in their space. And if you're trying to recruit the best candidate and you're trying to stand out and be that top of mind brand, then that's a potential way to say, well, our rate is not as good as our competitors, so we need to like focus on engagement. Now that said, there are a lot of other types of metrics that I don't think are necessarily well supported by just monitoring and looking at social media. I do think surveys are a really good way of trying to get a representative sample of not just your current customers, because obviously your current customers are going to know about you. They should, right? Otherwise, I want to know what your marketing process looks like, because that's pretty impressive if you can get people to buy without knowing who they're buying from. But so then there's other metrics that kind of support that in the survey realm, where you're talking about awareness, like I mentioned, and that can range from logo recognition to unaided awareness, which is where you're just saying what brands in the restaurant delivery space have you heard of, and you're not giving any list to kind of support that answer. And then there's aided awareness or recognition, and that's where you would provide a list. So those are just the awareness metrics, but then you've got things like familiarity, you've got preference, you've got sentiment, you've got demand, frequency, recency. These are all just like you would find at various stages within the performance marketing funnel. There are all sorts of, early indicator metrics and key performance indicators that you want to make sure that you're specific and clear about, because some support the others and some aren't as necessarily important as others as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you go back to kind of paper almost and do the survey route on, say, for kind of a normal size, say SME. What would the sample size recommendation be from you for that? Because like I've just finished up a master's and they always go, it's 1,000 people as a fair representative. But then like a normal business can't go out and find 1,000 people. Well, not in Ireland. But what kind of size grouping do you think would give you a decent idea of your awareness?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And like you said, if you're taking master's level math classes, they're gonna want you to try and go for that 99% confidence, and they're gonna want you to look for a 1 or 2% margin of error or less, and that's really where that 1,000 response kind of mark typically stands. We have seen anything from around 200 respondents, which it's a little rough. I mean, you're sitting there at around a 5 to 8% margin of error in some cases, all the way up to 400 or so in a market is usually around 4 or 5%, or maybe even less, around 3% margin of error, depending on a few other factors. But the other thing too is that depending on how strongly consumers feel about any particular thing, that margin of error might tank off pretty quickly too. So for example, or it might not matter so much. So for example, if you ask consumers, how many people have heard of a brand brands in a scooter space, right? And 2 brands stand out with 90% familiar or awareness, and the rest of them all have 10% awareness. That margin of error is not really all that useful, or I guess it doesn't really matter so much, because the gap between the variance is so large between the answers there.
Yeah. So it could come back essentially to how the survey was written to begin with as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then I think just another thing too, not to get too down the math rabbit hole there, it depends on how much you want to segment the data as well. And so if you need to see breakdowns by gender, or that's going to require more respondents. If you want to see breakdowns by age, that's going to require even more respondents, because there's more cohorts. And so you have to kind of take those things into consideration. But I think anywhere as few as 200 is generally a place where you can start to get some insights at a larger level.
Josh, when we think of like the big brands, I think we mostly probably think of consumer brands. We think of like Apple, Coca-Cola, all them. In terms of B2B brands, what's your kind of process, your metrics around measuring the strength of a B2B brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this will come down to people's individual strategies as well, because I think when you think B2B, I is that what's the goal of that business to business? Is it to get, different, is it for recruiting? In that case, employer branding, you're actually looking for potentially just candidates and potential candidates within that space, right? That would be your pool, your denominator, so to speak, that you're looking at. If you're looking to grow clients, then I think obviously the person that you would be working with, the actual user of the service, whoever your client contact is, that person's going to make up a really important part of that demographic that you want to talk to for your awareness and brand measurement studies for B2B, but also who else is in that buying committee. Is it going to be the folks in the C-suite? Is it going to be the investing community? If it does, then it's really important to include at least a portion of those folks in that particular study as well. We have worked with manufacturers, for example, where 40% of the time the engineer gets to make the call because they made the spec, but another 20% of the time it's procurement, and another 20% of the time it's the CEO because they went to a trade show and they came back and they said, I would really like for us to be able to use this product on our line. And then it's the engineer's job to try and incorporate that solution versus specify. So it depends, I think, but the best way to get started is to think about who does the brand matter to, and as broadly as I can think of, and start with that.
So kind of as in gather the potential decision makers, I suppose, of your company or your product or your service, and survey them. You find as in a traditional kind of survey method, or would you have some other metrics that you would use?
That's where I think it depends again on the efforts that I'm working on. There are specialty ways to get at very specific things. So for example, like LinkedIn has their their brand index tool. So they're looking at all of the different people that are engaging with a particular company, and then they're looking at those people's footprint. They're only back end data that they have access to on LinkedIn to come up with an index that shows this company versus that company. And some people might want to track that if they're thinking about in that employer branding space. Now, if you're doing sales, that's when you are actually bumping really closely up into the entire account-based marketing kind of discipline. And so that's where I would have some brand supporting metrics as part of a much larger sales and growth marketing measurement plan around account-based marketing. So yeah, I think it kind of depends, and surveys are not the only thing that I would use at all. They have to be part of a larger measurement strategy, part of which tracks your actual revenue, because this stuff is exactly, you want to tie it back to revenue. Let's not forget that. That's what this was about. So.
Yeah.
In terms then of if we are looking offline and measuring offline, so obviously online we have our different metrics from all the different social platforms, from our analytics, all that. Is there anything you do offline besides surveys, we'll say, for measuring brand?
I think it's when you say the word offline, I think of two things. Number one is tactically, measuring things not digitally but through offline means, and that's where it's increasingly difficult to do that via phone. That used to be a very common method, but nobody answers their phones anymore, and so it's increasingly difficult to do that. And the replacement for that is usually intercepting somebody in an app or a game that they're playing, or an app that they're in, or an article that they're reading. So that's kind of taken an offline tactic and pushed it online. Mail still works in some cases, especially in audiences that are not often online. So there are people that don't like technology. I know not many of your podcast listeners, I'm sure, but we have to remember that there are still plenty of consumers out there and important decision makers that aren't online all the time. And so surveys sent through mail can be a way to do it. In-person events. In-person events is incredibly underrated. If you're going to a trade show and you know that 90% of your industry is going to be there, and you don't have some sort of gated something or other, or you don't have a way to tie whatever your current business challenge or struggles are to that day and to that event to try and get feedback, get voice of customer, get things straight from that particular market, they're all in one room. Why not do it there, right? Yeah. So that's I think those are some of the offline opportunities that people have to not necessarily measure brand, as a KPI, or but you might be able to do some one-off studies. You might be able to get a lot of anecdotal input that is going to help your overall marketing and brand strategy.
Cool. Yeah, I like the trade show idea. When we're sitting in front of the computer all day, you kind of forget this other world exists. Yeah. the offline world. And there is obviously a huge amount of people, as you say, who don't, well, I'm sure they have some exposure to it. They're not constantly, on LinkedIn or constantly on social media. And you do need to reach out to them, because they're going to be a big part of what your brand means as well.
Yeah, and say, for example, if you were going down the traditional route of, say, like TV or radio or those kind of things, and say they're saying to you, well, these are the average watch times, and this is the average number of people. But then in experience, I've found that sometimes they'll go, well, it's one TV, but we'll assume it's a family of 5 watching it, and these kind of metrics that come. How would you kind of say go about to a brand who's saying, look, I'm going to do all of this TV. These are the metrics that we're aiming to get based on what they've given us. And then in reality, would you kind of keep an eye on the Google Analytics to kind of see what comes in around those times that the ads are live? Or is there any kind of thing that you can give to companies as a tool to say, maybe those metrics weren't 100%, but this is what you actually got from it, really a closer margin?
Yeah, I think I think the entire industry still struggles to measure the effect of brand advertising, whether it's in television or whether it's coming across to over the top advertising, which I think is a little bit, that's better, right? Because then you're actually, able to look at maybe cost per engaged views or cost per impression, those types of things. Where I can, I think I try to encourage people to get increasingly brand dollars into performance type channels. I think because it is more attributable, and I think there's a lot of people that think, oh, TV, that's where it needs to be, or movie theaters, that's the best place for advertising. But so much of that is in the creative investment itself, that if you were to put that level of effort into developing a non-gated piece of content, or a branded series that's live every week on YouTube or LinkedIn, or something that is online and ranks for the trophy term in your category, not now, but a year from now, after everybody's finally heard about it and linked to it and has a chance to make some rounds in the media, right? Those types of longer term plays for brand, I think that's where I'm recommending people move, because then you do get the benefit of brand, but you also get the benefit of measurability. And whether you're going for, engaged impressions, or if you're going for the size of an audience that you can build, or I know some brands right now are working on trying to correlate media spend with actual lifts in branded search traffic. And that, the more that we're doing to do that, I think the better. And so I can't wait to get my dollars out of some of those less trackable channels into these places that are just as good or might be even better, and also have that measurement capability.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I mean, it is very, like, we would see people coming into us and they're spending on radio and you obviously look, it's just not really that measurable, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, you have your estimated audience size.
Yeah. But even at that, I mean, like, people have come to us and they're saying, well, what can you do differently? What will taking my money from radio and putting it into online do for me? Will it be more? Will it be less? And all we can say is, we don't know where you're starting from. So it's like you're starting fresh. It doesn't matter where the budget was before. This is a new area.
This is the first fully trackable area.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I do have a pretty controversial, I don't know, maybe controversial opinion on that too. I think, I am a fan of, Gary Vee and some of the stuff that he says. And, he's been quoted as saying, if I had, I'd put all my advertising money in like Facebook, Instagram, Google. And after that, I'd maybe do like Super Bowl commercial or Super Bowl advertising, that type of stuff. Right. And, but his point is basically like, do the Super Bowl commercials or just do everything digital. Yeah. And I know that my own personal bias has me skewed towards that. And so right or wrong,
no, I think
your
that's
listeners can take that with a grain of salt.
The Super Bowl makes sense though, mostly just from the point, okay, your one ad has all that reach during the game, but then all of the online attention you were getting and across all the news networks and across everything else as well.
I don't think I've ever seen a game of American football in my life, but I have watched every Super Bowl advert in the last maybe 3 or 4 years. I don't even. Yeah,
and I think that's kind of his point, is that it's a destination type ad versus something else that that you
it's
have
the
to
one
work
time people actually want to watch advertising.
They're looking up from their phones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So Josh, if someone's listening to, let's say they're, small bit, medium business, they're doing a bit of online advertising, maybe a bit of radio, they have no idea how much clout their brand is, what kind of they probably have never done a survey, most of them more than likely. They probably don't, they really just don't know probably the reputation of the brand, I guess. How would you, if you'd like 3 tips for them to get started into understanding and measuring the awareness or measuring the power that their brand does or doesn't have, what kind of would you recommend that they start with?
Yeah, I think it's intimidating, I think, to say, well, I have to put this survey together and I have to get, math involved and statistics, and I don't have a license for that type of stuff. So I think it's best to just usually start off with something simple. And so for people who are in search marketing, look at your search trends for your branded terms relative to your competitors' terms. That will tell you a lot. Heck, just go to Google Trends and search for your brand versus another brand. And that will tell you a lot of information. Google Trends will tell you a lot. Beyond that, I think sending emails to your existing customers has a lot of the same value as measuring brand. Obviously, it's a much more biased group, and so you can't measure things like awareness from your email list because you're going to do really well, and that would be misleading. But I think asking things like, what does this brand do really well? How do you associate, what types of things do you associate with our brand? What's important to you when you buy this type of thing that we sell? How well do we do serving you in those areas? Those types of things. If you're not a household, name yet, doing that thing now with your initial customers to make sure that you have a brand that can really grow, that's worth talking about, that has a great product, that has a great service. Ultimately, brands don't grow unless they provide amazing experiences. So you want to get that thing, you want to figure that out with your, existing customers, even if it's just 1 or 2 now, so that you can create a brand that does grow and that you can measure at those, larger levels.
Cool. Yeah. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
If people want to find out more about you and about Brandish Insights, where should they head to?
They can head to brandishinsights.com or find me on LinkedIn, Josh Braaten, LinkedIn/in/JL Braaten.
Perfect. I'll add those into the show notes as well. So for anyone listening, check out the show notes if you want to head over to Josh.
Excellent. Josh, thanks so much.
Thanks again.
That has been this week's episode of the Digital Marketing Scoop.